Okay, we're gonna get started. We got a bunch of legislators said they were coming, but typically legislators are late for everything, so what the heck. My name's Ken Homeland. I'm the legislator from Miles City, House District 38 in eastern Montana. Seems to me like one of the things that we tend to do in our modern day civilization is that we ignore what's happened in the past. And it doesn't really play a part in our lives, and that's a shame. Being a fellow who actually taught history and enjoys the study of history, when I got the opportunity to meet with Jim and we started getting to know what he had done and the history that he has that really no one else has, and I've talked with several of the older people around here and they've not got a clue what Jim's going to report to us on. So after numerous arm twistings and back pattings and threats and let's see, what else did I do with you, Jim? Anyway, I asked him one day, I said, so, you know, I heard you were an architect, and that led to another thing, and pretty soon he started talking about this building. And I find this building to be just a beautiful, beautiful building. I've been in other state capitals, and this one ranks right up there with them. And then he starts talking about all the architectural stuff that went on after the earthquakes and all this, and I thought, that'd be a fascinating subject. And then he really hit me with it. He says, and we've got pictures. I go, oh boy. So here we are. We're here to listen to what the gentleman has to say, and if you got questions, why, I'm sure that he will be perfectly glad to field them. Is that right, Jim? He's got his arm twisted again. But anyway, most of you, I do believe, you know that Jim Brown, and we will listen to what he has to say. So, Jim, it's all yours.
Thank you, Representative Homeland. First of all, I would like to dedicate the talk today to a fellow Sergeant at Arms who unfortunately had a mishap on Monday. He tried to stop a car crossing Montana Avenue. So this speech today is dedicated to my friend and colleague, Ed Grief, and his wife, the Representative Sharon Grief. So even though we don't have a whole lot of legislators here, I'm going to be approaching this as if I'm in a hearing in front of the legislature. So bear with me on my introduction. Senate President Blaisdell, House Speaker Galt, majority and minority leaders of the Senate and House, senators and representatives of the 67th Legislative Assembly, family members, staff, and anybody else I've missed. For the record, I am Jim Brown. I represent no one but myself and our forefathers who had the courage and foresight to settle in our state of Montana. I am a third-generation Hellenan, a graduate of Montana State University, go Bobcats, former member of the 396th Station Hospital, U.S. Army Reserve. I was an architect for 40 years. I'm a retiree of 12 years. And now I'm honored to serve our wonderful fellow Montanans as a member of the House Sergeant at Arms staff. I stand before you without shame to announce that I have an unending love for all things Montana. I love this great state from Plentywood to Montana, or from Monida, from Alzada to the Yak, from the magnificence of the Rocky Mountains to the quiet solitude of the Eastern Plains. I believe there is no better place to live than in Montana, truly God's country. I also have an over 65-year love affair with this great maiden we call the Montana capital. It began when my father, who embraced the lobbying profession, would bring me and my siblings out to Saturday sessions. Now, we didn't have a burning desire to learn our civics lessons at that time, but rather because it was the only time we got to eat Eskimo pies. But something clicked, and I returned to middle school to serve as a page when pages served the entire 90 days of the session. But my love really developed when I was hired to measure up the Capitol and inventory the furniture in preparation for the second phase of the seismic renovation of the building, the topic of our presentation today. I am neither a trained historian nor a scholar, but I love to read, listen, and learn about Montana's history. There will be some in the audience with greater knowledge than me who may take umbrage with some of my statements, and I welcome any admonitions or tongue lashings offered that might make my misstatements less egregious. It is said that there are 3 levels of storytelling: lies, damn lies, and prevarications, lies told with good intentions. I consider myself among the latter. One of the joys in learning about Montana's history is that we have compressed 245 years of U.S. history into 122 years of Montana history, including all the good and the bad. On the plus side, Montana is the host of 2 national parks, the first dedicated wildernesses, the first Stock Growers Association, the first female elected to Congress, and home to the likes of Chiefs Charlot and Joseph, Charlie Russell, Mike Mansfield, and Chet Huntley. On the minus side, Montana experienced Little Bighorn, the Baker Massacre, the Vigilantes, the War of the Copper Kings, the election of William A. Clark to Congress, the Unabomber, the Jordan Freeman, and the fight for Helena as Montana's capital, which is a segue to our tale today. The discovery of gold in California resulted in the migration to the West Coast, with the resultant view of the Great Plains as territory to travel through. As the coastal region became developed and expats from the Civil War, particularly Southerners fleeing their burned-out homesteads, moved inward, the pressure for Montana's statehood grew. With the end of the war and the discovery of gold along the banks of Grasshopper Creek, Montana began to find identity. Even though there was a great desire in Washington for Montana's gold to help finance Reconstruction, political tensions in Congress prevented our initial attempts at statehood. Bannock was named Montana's territorial capital, and Sidney Edgerton territorial governor. It did not take very long for Montana's gold to run out at Bannock, and so the territorial capital was moved to Virginia City. During this period, Territorial Governor Edgerton left the territory for personal reasons, and Thomas Marr became temporary governor. Now, Thomas Marr, having political aspirations, called the first Constitutional Convention, which drafted a document that was apparently lost while being transported to St. Louis for printing. In the 1870s, there were 2 elections to move the capital to Helena, and the pattern of election malfeasance was firmly established. The vote tally for Marr County was reported in one manner on election day, but when the totals were reported to be canvassed, the results were transposed. The Territorial Supreme Court ruled the Marr County votes null and awarded the capital to Helena. Montana now entered the era of the War of the Copper Kings, a wonderful study of personal animosity, raw corporate power, and corrupt judiciary. Its significance in today's recitation resides in the animosity between Marcus Daly and William Clark. Daly desired the capital to be located in his company town of Anaconda. Clark did not care where the capital was located as long as it was not in Anaconda, and thus threw his expensive personality and great wealth in favor of Helena. The resulting battle in 1874 was one of wonderfully written editorials in area newspapers and enormous profits for local saloons, as voters were courted by any and all means. It was calculated that for every vote cast, $56 was spent. Helena was declared the winner, and the resultant celebration was one for the century, as it was reported that Clark paid to keep all the saloons in Helena open all night. Once again, however, election fraud would be alleged. And just a few years ago, it was reported that a home being remodeled in Helena revealed a secret stash of ballots that might have resulted in a different election result for the capital. Now the focus shifted to obtaining statehood. Congress finally passed enabling legislation to allow Montana's entry into the Union. There were three requirements: develop a constitution, conduct a census, and develop a budget. The election of 1889 and Precinct 34 in Butte set the tone for the first two legislative sessions. Nothing happened. It seems that Butte sent two full delegations, one Republican and one Democratic. Being unable to resolve the legitimacy of either delegation, the legislature left town. I have it on good authority, but have not been able to independently confirm it, that the honorable representative in seat 10 in the House, Representative Jim Keene, was a member of one of those delegations. Despite Montana's shenanigans, on November 8, 1889, we became a state, and we needed a capital. A capital commission was appointed, and graft raised its ugly head once again. The first commission was accused of plotting to abscond with the funds for the capital and was abolished. The governor appointed a second commission who retained Bell and Kent as the capital architects. Supposedly, two different sets of plans were developed, resulting in unfair advantages for preferred contractors over the others. With great fanfare, the cornerstone was laid by the Masonic Grand Lodge of Montana on July 4, 1889, and the building was dedicated on July 4, 1902. The two wings were added in 1909. So why are we here today? In the late 1950s, a secretary was rolling a book cart down the second floor corridor when one of the wheels punched through the floor. A local contractor was called to repair the damage, but as he worked, the problem became more profound, and he had the good sense to stop and call for an investigation. John Morrison Sr., founder of Morrison Merrily Incorporated, a local engineering firm, told me the following story. He was in Libby on a project one Friday when he received a call from then Governor Aronson, the Galloping Swede. After pleasantries were exchanged, the governor inquired where John was. When John responded, "Libby," the governor said, "You have a long drive in store for you. I need you in the rotunda at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." When John arrived at the Capitol, he was greeted by the governor and the leadership of both houses of the legislature. Governor Aronson picked up a wrecking bar leaning against the wall, walked out in the center of the rotunda, dropped the bar, and it went all the way through the slab down to the floor below. Turning to the leadership, he informed them that the building was in jeopardy and they needed to approve funding for a rehab. In the fall of 1959, the Yellowstone Hebgen Lake quake added urgency to that message. The second floor was declared unstable and the center of the rotunda was roped off. People could only walk down the edges of the corridors and around the edges of the rotunda. Rehabilitation planning ensued and construction work began. This was accomplished in 2 stages between legislative sessions. The first was begun in 1960 and renovated the building from the rotunda to the east wing. The second, in 1965, renovated the rotunda and the remainder of the building to the west wing. My association with the building began with the field work in the summer of '65 for the Phase 2 work. The slides that follow are mostly from the first phase. A few comments to preface the finished work. As with all design projects, expectations are exchanged and budgets established. In addition to the seismic work, we were instructed to make the Capitol a modern office building, including better lighting in the Senate and more room for legislative functions. To that end, several decisions were made that in retrospect were unfortunate. Many have been reversed, but unfortunately others were permanent. This is a photo of the underside of the second floor slab after the ceilings were demolished. The significance is, if you look where my pointer is, here, 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 and here, you see what we call honeycombing of the concrete. This is a result of the contractor not consolidating the slab properly, and this presents weak areas in the concrete slab. Thus, the reason why the wheel of the book cart went through the floor. Here's a picture showing what we called rolled steel channels. They were put in as arches to help support the floor in the original design. You can see that they're temporarily short because they were starting into failure. It's difficult to really perceive, but you can see that the floor slab is actually deflecting in this area. And you can see how this arch has flattened out. And the reason for that is because these channels were bearing on a beam on each end, but they did not what we call pin the channels. They were just set on the beams free. And as a load is applied to the slab, that allowed those arches to flatten out, thus losing the structural integrity of the arch effect. Good picture of the concrete slab after they started to demolish it. Yes, sir. I'm sorry? This would have been in the 1960 phase, the first phase. So two things I want to point out here. Number one is the wonderful reinforcing that they use for the concrete slab, commonly called chicken wire. And the other item that I need to show to you is where that chicken wire is located. It's located in the bottom of the slab, where it does absolutely no good. This is a picture of the thickness of the slab. This is 3-inch mark right here, so the slab is 2 3/4 inches thick. Little explanation about concrete slabs. There are basically two forms of floor slabs. One is supported, and one is what we call structural. So a supported slab is where they leave the formwork in, i.e. wood deck, or what you see most commonly in today's world, metal decking that's corrugated, and then they pour concrete on top, or structural slabs, which have no support under them. The integrity comes from the reinforcing in the slab. The minimum thickness for a structural slab, which is what these would have been, is 4 inches. We've got 2 3/4 inches here. And once again, our reinforcing of chicken wire is in the bottom of the slab. Yes? In the original Capitol, when the Capitol was built. So all of this work is done in the original 1899 Capitol. This is the floor that was failing. And that was second floor. Wonderful example of craftsmanship in building an arch. Not. So you can see the brickwork, and you can see that they had to leave the formwork in underneath because even before they were finished, that arch started to fail. Another example of the beginning of an arch, here and here. What the hell, we'll just throw a steel beam in and forget the whole thing. Steel beam is up here where it really does no good. Steel beam needs to be down where the opening is. Don't you love good craftsmanship? So a couple of things about this. Number one, obviously, is the craftsmanship. Notice the uniformity of the brick. Small ones here, larger ones here, none here. But also in this wall is this area here, which is called clay tile. Most of you are familiar with concrete masonry units, concrete block. Structural clay tile was the precursor to concrete block, except it's a clay product and it's fired, which makes it extremely brittle. Not a good thing to have in the wall in an earthquake. It has a tendency to break apart extremely easily. Another good example of quality craftsmanship. Here they embedded, they embedded what we call sleepers. Those are wood members that are put into a floor when you're going to put wood flooring over the top. Here they embedded the wood sleepers in the concrete, thus causing problems for the structural integrity of the floor itself. Here are the rolled steel channels after all the concrete has been removed. The corridor portion, the main corridor is here. This is 2 bays of the steel over the offices. What I wanted to show you here is that at some time or another, they came in and put in turnbuckles to keep those arches from flattening out. That's your Capitol, folks. This is a photo taken from the 4th floor by the rotunda. And you're looking all the way down into the basement to the east wing. We completely gutted the Capitol from wall to wall, from basement floor to the underside of the roof. The only thing left standing in the Capitol was the columns and the beams. This was done over a 2-year period. 1899. That it was built? The Capitol was built between 1899 and 1902, so it could have been any time at all. Just shoddy work period. That's the theory, yes. So another shot down through the Capitol. And this is looking towards the rotunda. You can see the archway at the 4th floor level, right here, looking into the rotunda. The underside of the roof. So this is a photo of the exterior wall, and one of the things that I want to point out here, this is the roof drain from the roof that came down that they channeled into the exterior wall. Nice little weakening of the exterior wall. Anybody want to venture a guess as to where this photo was taken? Let me help you out. See this element right here? See this element right here? Anybody recognize that? Those 2 columns right there. And there's the entrance to the Secretary of the Senate's office. So these columns were left in place, essentially hung from the roof structure during construction, and then built up underneath them. This is a photo at the 4th floor level. These are the 4th floor windows. Once again, notice how they channeled into the wall to put a roof drain leader down, thus weakening the wall. Shot looking down as they're getting ready to start what we call shotcrete, and I'll explain that a little bit more here in a minute. To answer your question, around all the columns we came in with a cage of reinforced steel, and then we put concrete around those columns to reinforce them. For those beams that were embedded in the brick walls, now you can see this was the typical connection that they had. They just carved out a hole in the brick and set the beam in there and then bricked around it. So we're in the process here of building a pilaster to support the beam. And this is the reinforcing for that, and they will form it and pour it concrete column. There are several methods that we use to resist earthquakes. The most prevalent one, probably the easiest one that we use, is what's called a shear wall. So we'll take a given wall and we will super reinforce it. And we will dictate how many openings can go through that wall, what the size of those openings are, and that wall will become a permanent entity within the structure to help hold the structure up. So here we are, we're starting to build up for a shear wall, and I can't tell you where it is in the Capitol, but that's how this is designed now to resist earthquakes. Yes, Bill? That's one of the old beams. Oh, up here? No, that's an opening. Yeah. Yeah. So, thanks for the questions. So this is a detail of how we, when we were going to deal with the exterior walls, how we were going to anchor things to the walls. So in this detail, this is the sandstone on the exterior of the building. This is the existing brick here, and we drilled through the existing brick into the back of the sandstone and epoxy anchors in to hold that stone on. And then this is the shotcrete on the inside to strengthen the wall. So here's some of those anchors installed in the wall. Now we're getting ready to shotcrete. So let me explain shotcrete. Think of a concrete slab turned vertical. That's basically all it is. So it's got reinforcing in it, and then they pneumatically place the concrete using a hose and a gun. So here's a technician starting to shotcrete on the inside of the exterior walls. They'll set up what they call screed forms along the wall to give them the depth that they need to go, and also a way to put a straight edge so that they can get a nice clean wall. Here's a technician, what we call striking off the shotcrete. So the concrete has been applied to the wall. He's in there with a concrete float, basically, and he's working the wall over to get it smooth and plumb. So all of the exterior walls have received this treatment. That's why if you look at the exterior windows, the depth is so deep on those windows. You've got stone, you've got 12 inches of brick, and then you've got 8 inches of shotcrete, and then plaster on that. So it's a very, very heavy and very thick wall. Here we're getting ready to pour a concrete floor. Notice that we didn't use chicken wire. These are what are called bus ducts, and they are electrical chases for when we want to put electrical outlets in a floor. They run the wires through these chases. Here's a room that is being finished off. Back in the days when we still had a plastering profession, here are plasters putting on the finished coat of plaster. All new ductwork for heating and all new piping for steam and domestic water. Yes? Definitely the piping that was taken out of the building did. The pipe that we put in, no, it was all fiberglass. This is our glamour shot. Every photo session has to have a glamour shot. This is the scaffolding on the inside of the dome during the reconstruction. Kind of a dramatic shot, don't you think? So this is the finish work after all of the demolition. This, of course, is the Supreme Court. The skylight had been taken out, cleaned, and replaced. The paintings had all been covered and then cleaned after the reconstruction. Shot of that area of the Supreme Court. Gallery behind. This is the Senate chamber. I need to address this because this is one of the decisions that was made that has not been reversed, and some people will decry what was done and why wasn't it reversed. Other people say, no, it's fine. In these openings, in the original building, these were a flat arch. Here, here, and here. The senators at that time wanted better vision for the floor. And so they ordered us to remove those arches and make them rectangles. To me, the effect is not that detrimental. I think it still carries the integrity of the space. There are others I know that would argue that the flat arches should have been put back in. Terry. Well, that's an interesting question and one actually that I will get into later on, but now that you brought it up, the legislature empowers the state architect to oversee the construction of any improvements to state buildings. In this particular case, and you'll hear his name brought up a little later in my speech, Senator Charles Bovee and his wife Sue were very big influences on the work that was done during the renovation of the Capitol. So he had a fairly significant influence on what was done in the Senate chamber. Who actually made the final decision, I honestly can't tell you. So here is the rotunda after we were done. Once again, the admonition was a modern office building. So you'll see that the color of the rotunda is a light color. You'll see a little more modern light fixture down the sides of the corridor. This is looking towards the so yeah, this is looking towards the Secretary of State's wing. This is a shot looking, a little better quality shot looking, let's see, towards the governor's wing. This is the Senate chambers. I need to note this. This is the mural of the driving of the Golden Spike. Not where it is today, folks. Because one of the other things that was done, the barrel vault was removed from over the grand staircase. And it was floored over because the legislature needed space for enrolling and engrossing clerks. And this was the only place that we could find that was underutilized. And thus the barrel vault was removed, it was floored over, and a luminous ceiling, unfortunately when this photo was taken, the ceiling was not lit, was put in over the grand staircase. Well, the driving of the Golden Spike, when the barrel vault was in, sat right there, and after the renovation, it was moved to where the fan window is, where the Senate gallery is currently. Yes, Bill. It was a terrazzo floor, right. No, it was on all the floors. Yep. So thank you for asking that question, because if you look right here, this is the seal of the great state of Montana poured in terrazzo. Hence the scaffolding in the glamour photo that I showed you, the architect from our office climbed that scaffolding and told the technicians how to lay out this seal. Now, a word about the rotunda floor. Remember I told you about the governor going out and dropping the steel bar through the floor. In this area, in the center of the rotunda, where currently there is turquoise-colored hexagonal tiles, how many of you have ever seen or remember glass block in sidewalks? A few of you. So that used to be a material that was used fairly widely in outside of historic buildings to get light into the basement. They were glass blocks about yay wide, like that. They looked like the bottom of Coke bottles when you looked through them. And they were embedded in a steel framework and then set in the concrete slab. That was what was in the center of the rotunda. So you could be down on the first floor and look up and you could see the shadow of people walking over your head. Unfortunately, that creates a very weak floor system. And so that was pretty much a no-brainer that had to go away and stay away. So now today, with the renovation that's been done, they've kind of replicated it with the turquoise hexagonal tile. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say what the shot of that floor. When I came to Helena in high school in the 60s,
Just a view down the corridor towards the Secretary of State. Once again, note the modern light fixtures, the lighter color on the walls, and the terrazzo floor. Shot down towards the governor's office. Note that that's changed quite a bit, the entry to the governor's office. Not by our hands. Shot of the interior of the dome. And shot up into the top of the dome. What I need to show you here is, see these bright spots? That's where vandals over the years had knocked out some of the stained glass in the oculus. That has been repaired. And there is now a safety glass put over the top of that oculus for when people go up into the dome, they can't injure that stained glass anymore. And the window at the top of the grand staircase, that window was removed, cleaned, and reinstalled. So that was, most of those were photos from the phase one. Phase two resulted in pretty much the same extent of demolition and renovation that you just saw. Some of you are probably aware of State Senator Charles and Sue Bovee. I brought them up here just a minute ago, and their restoration work in Virginia City and Nevada City. What most people do not know was their role in the preservation of capital material. At the completion of our two seismic projects, the state opted to auction off all of the historical materials and objects removed from the Capitol. Thanks to the Bovees, the Senate chandelier and skylight, the barrel vault structure and stained glass, and various other objects were purchased and stored in Nevada City and ultimately returned to the Capitol. An interesting side note is that the building that held the Senate chandelier caught fire. And because it was so big and heavy, they had to drag it out of the building with a pickup truck. In 1980, our firm was retained to design the historical renovation of the Capitol. A special commission consisting of equal numbers of the majority and minority parties of both houses of the legislature, along with members from the executive branch, was convened to oversee the project. In those days, in addition to the governor's and Secretary of State's offices, the state auditor, superintendent of public instruction, and attorney general were still in the building. The legislature and legislative council were seeking additional space for dedicated committee hearing rooms and offices for the functions of the council that were expanding as the legislature became more self-sufficient. As our design development phase progressed, and decisions were made by the select committee, the structure of the committee became a political football and ultimately resulted in involving the third branch of our government. A lawsuit was filed against us, challenging the structure of the select committee, and the case ultimately ended up in the state Supreme Court. The ruling by the court found that the select committee was a legislative entity and therefore could not have executive branch membership. And thus, all design decisions made had to be reconsidered by the legislature only. In addition, it basically gave control of the Capitol to the legislature, except for the spaces already dedicated to the executive on the second floor. The spatial needs of the various entities far exceeded the available square footage, so we had to look for alternative solutions. So these are the developmental design drawings that we presented to the legislature for the renovation of the Capitol. This is the ground floor plan, the basement. In the west wing, we were calling for a full-fledged cafeteria. These would be new, buried underneath the south lawn, committee hearing rooms. This was a 3-story vault for the Secretary of State that was sandwiched in between 2 floors. An interesting little structural problem. This is this is part of the Secretary of State also. And then this shows a new stairway and elevator between the east wing and the original building, and new exit stairs in the 2 wings. On the first floor, in the east wing, this wing here, was going to be the legislative auditor. The Environmental Quality Council was going to occupy this area. We had dedicated committee hearing rooms down the corridor. On this portion of the corridor was the legislative fiscal analyst, and then the legislative council occupied the entire west wing. And the post office moved to this area. The second floor, the governor's office in the east wing, as it is today. OPI moved into this area. And by the way, this is all governor's office functions. So OPI was going to maintain a presence in the Capitol. And then Secretary of State occupy the West Wing as they do now. This was the major change that forced the lawsuit that ended up in the Supreme Court. Old Law Library, Committee Room 317 to you legislators. New Senate Chamber. Senate leadership offices. This room would remain as it was. Existing Senate chamber, floored over at the 3rd floor level, and committee hearing rooms created on the 2nd floor on both sides of a central corridor. House functions and the House of Representatives remains as it is. The thought process there was to create a functional symmetry to the building, having the House over here, the Senate over here, spread out Lobbyist Alley to cut down on the congestion between the 2 entities. The 4th floor, the new Senate gallery, which we would have to create. Senate hearing rooms. This area here, which would be underneath the stained glass ceiling of the Senate, was going to become a legislative lounge with it would have a locker room here for legislative coats and personal possessions, and then this was just a lounge area where they could get away from the hubbub of the session. Hearing rooms for the House, and then the House chamber as it is today. Construction documents for that work were developed and bids were solicited, but all the bids greatly exceeded the project budget. The overall project was ultimately canceled. However, certain portions were authorized for contract. Notable items were the new elevator and exit stair between the east wing and the original building, new exit stairs in the two wings, re-roofing major portions of the Capitol, repair of the original sandstone exterior, rebuild of the south entrance, and remodel of the old Supreme Court chamber, what's now known as Room 303, into how it is today. Another notable remodeled element was waterproofing the basement of the West Wing, currently the House bullpen area. Each spring, the Capitol had the history that water would run across the floor of the West Wing in the basement. When we excavated down around the foundation, we found a small spring flowing through the bedrock just outside the Capitol. A couple of side notes. Reflecting back on the graft involving the original Capitol Building Commission, sandstone is not a good material in areas of freeze-thaw. Sandstone is porous, and this sandstone has significant clay particles embedded that absorb water. The stone came from a quarry outside of Columbus as a political payoff. The stone provided absorbs water that freezes and pops pieces of the stone off periodically. A second side note involves the desks in this room. The central desk was the original Supreme Court judicial bench and was 2 risers higher, so up about 14 inches from where it is now. The desks at the end were the original clerk's desks, and the gates and the balusters were part of the original area of the dais. And they were all 1 riser higher. And these 2 desks sat in front of that, facing out in this room. We did the remodel to construct this room as the committee hearing room you see today. Now, one of the joys of my profession is watching craftsmen. A local painter, Pat McKelvey, was brought in to apply the finish to the 2 new wood desks, which are the desks that are at the diagonal. Those are new. I watched him as he positioned more than a dozen cans of stain around him and methodically applied small areas of stain, watched while they were absorbed, wiped them off, and applied another sample until he achieved the proper color and patina. I left after 2 hours, and he was still working to get the proper mix. As you leave the room, please take a close look at these desks and see what a true craftsman can achieve. A final side note. The statue on top of the dome showed up on the site in 1901. No one knew anything about it because it had been commissioned by the original Capitol Commission that was disbanded and their proceedings burned. For years, people called the statue on the top of the dome Lady Liberty. When I was growing up, we said it was President Eisenhower screwing in a light bulb. Does that date me? No one really knew who or what she was. In 2006, the sculptor's granddaughter found documentation in his possessions confirming his commission from the state and the official name for the statue as Montana. There's been really not very much modification done to the exterior of the Capitol. Most of what has been done is weather-related. This is a picture of the granite stone between the rear entrance doors down at the first floor. It shows you what ice melt salts can do to stone. Here is an example of what I was talking about the porous sandstone. You can see the discoloration. You can see the loss of the face of the stone here. You can see how the stone is starting to chip away here. It won't be very many more years before this face will actually come off of this stone. Another example. This photo is taken from a little too far away, but the significance of it is, if you look here and here, you can see where pieces of the cornice have actually fallen away. That was true all the way around the building. So part of our work was to restore that. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? Guess what it is? Fiberglass. They made fiberglass shells and put over the face of the cornice. And then on top, we took roofing material and roofed the flat area of the cornice and then put a metal edge on it to keep water from getting back into the stone. The original stone is still there, but it looks much, much better. Doesn't look like a 6-year-old child who's lost her teeth. Once again, here's some of the cornice work that is missing. But the significance of this photo is the rear entry. So visualize that, and there's the rear entry rebuilt. Once again, fiberglass. So we were able to resurrect some of the old stone, basically here. This is original stonework. The fascia and the cornice are fiberglass. So here is the transition between the east wing, the governor's wing, and the original building before. There's that same transition after we put in the new exit stair and elevator. Once again, craftsmanship was so much fun to watch here. Bill? This is the granite that was peeled off of here. And Gruber Masonry from Clancy was the mason on the project, and it was just a joy to watch true craftsmen work. Significance of this photo, this is the south elevation of the west wing. Notice anything here? See the infills between the columns? That's the Charlie Russell mural in the house chamber. Back in the 50s and 60s, when we were doing the seismic renovation, art curators came in to examine that mural and discovered that the frost drive in the wintertime was lifting the paint off of the mural on the inside. So these were put in. This is actually behind here a hollow chamber. And if you look behind the dais in the house chambers, you will see grills through the wall to permit warm air to circulate through here to keep the mural from being affected by frost. And then the last kind of major change that has been made to the exterior is in the porte cochere. This was not done by us. This was done in the historic renovation that was done in the late 90s. This has been infilled now with doors, and this now forms the main entry for the building. Finally, in 1999, thanks to the heroic efforts of the late First Lady Betty Babcock and the late Attorney General Joe Mazurik, the current historical restoration project was completed, restoring the Capitol to most of its original condition in the public areas. Under the direction of A&E Partnership Architects and Jim McDonald Historic Architect, the chandelier and stained glass ceiling in the Senate was retrieved from Nevada City and reinstalled, along with the barrel vault over the grand staircase, thanks to Ford Bovee and the Historical Society. The original paint schemes were restored in the rotunda and main corridors, and period-sensitive flooring materials were installed. By this time, most of the executive branch divisions, except the governor and secretary of state, had found alternative office space outside the Capitol. And now the majority of the building is dedicated to the legislature and its related functions. It is my fervent hope that I have given you a thirst for Montana's history, educated you about the history of the magnificent lady we call the Capitol, but most of all, I hope I've entertained you. I have focused a lot on the graft and corruption that plagued the building, but only because it's such great fun to view these things in retrospect. As I have served this session, however, I have witnessed good people trying their best to honor the profound burden the voters of our great state have bestowed upon them. We are blessed to have citizens who are willing to step up and put themselves out in the public eye to absorb all that comes with the responsibility of being an elected official. On behalf of the wonderful people of Montana, thank you all so very much. Mr. President and Mr. Speaker, this concludes my presentation, and I will stand for questions. Yes, Ed,
This would be a good time for a question.
please.
If you don't mind, would be interested, first I want to say the chief says, as a legislator, getting that history. I have my own personal places in the building where I think are special meetings or whatever. I'd be interested in what your personal area or point as an architect, your history with this building. What's really unique or what's special to you or your house?
Not because I redesigned it, but to me, this is probably the most beautiful room in the Capitol. The form of it, the skylight, the chandelier, the beautiful carvings. Interestingly enough, though, those carvings are not wood, they're metal in the face of the desk. But this room exudes all of the early history of Montana. This served as the original Senate chamber. The Senate served as the original House chamber. Then when the wings were added in 1909, the Senate moved into the House chamber, the House moved into the West Wing, and this became the Supreme Court. Think of the history, think of the decisions, think of the debate that has happened in this space and continues in this space. This serves as the committee hearing room for judiciary. We have had some fantastic debates on laws and the judiciary over the years in this room that affect you and me every day of our lives. So this room to me is probably the best room. I am extremely pleased that the decision to floor over the grand staircase was reversed and the barrel vault was able to be put back in. That has obviously restored the integrity of the vision of that grand staircase. By the way, a little side note there. If you go down to the first floor of the grand staircase and you look at the light fixtures on the pedestals on each side, look at the globes really carefully. You will see the Great Seal of the state of Montana etched in those globes. Just a little side note. Any other questions? Bill? The Salish Kootenai ranged through Idaho and into Montana. Their home territory was mostly in Idaho, but their hunting range extended into Montana. And of course, he is best known for his retreat through Montana and ultimately defeat up on the northern region. But you're right, he is not necessarily native to Montana, but he did spend a lot of time here.
Now, my real question is on the sandstone, because you said in your original 65, you showed a detail of the connection of the sandstone to the interior.
Yes, sir.
And then you said in the subsequent renovation
Not necessarily. So we've taken care of the real critical areas so far. What I showed you in the slides about the deterioration that is continuing is mostly down towards the base of the wall where water can sheet down and then stay, or be affected by wind and erosion that way on the lower extremities. The upper portions have been, they're sheltered by that cornice, and now that we have waterproofed the cornice, we're not getting as much water coming down directly on the sandstone. Most of it is just wind-driven rain. So, yeah, I predict that they're still going to, over the years to come, they're still going to have problems with pieces of sandstone popping off, but it's not going to be the major losses that they were experiencing before our work in 1980. When the Missouri building was built out on the east side of the Historical Society, the Supreme Court moved over there, and they actually function in a room in that building, which is very modernistic. Occasionally, I've heard where they will come over and do some historic deed over here and use the original bench for it, but that's very, very rare, and usually it's for show more than anything else. You betcha. Thank you all. How many years did I work on this building? Well, I was between my freshman and sophomore years of college when I worked on measuring up the building and inventorying furniture for phase 2. And then did a few minor things between the 70s after I graduated and 1980 when I was hired as the project architect for the work that unfortunately ultimately was not done, but did result in pieces being done. I did interview for the historical renovation, but unfortunately my reputation preceded me, and I was not selected for that work. So. My understanding is that the state is recording this. So, yeah. So.
Along those lines, I talked to them this morning. Well, I talked to them about that today, and they couldn't give me the exact location of where this is going to be stored, but it was streamed live out, and it's also going to be recorded, and it's also, this information is going to be taken over to the Historical Society because this is our history. And we need to have some place over there. I even heard they might even set up a little corner in the new building when they get it done to be things of this nature that have happened in our capital. So I think we're just very, very fortunate to have Jim be willing to come and talk to us and give us some real factual person. So thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate it.